Tony Beets did not just mine for gold, he went into battle with the Yukon itself. The reward he was chasing was massive, a staggering $3 million in gold. But the price he had to pay was almost everything: his patience, his trust, and even the strength of his crew. What unfolded was a season filled with highs that glittered like the gold itself, and lows that shook the very foundation of his entire operation. The journey was not simple. It was a road paved with moments of pure triumph, where hundreds of ounces of raw gold spilled out of the sluice boxes and reminded everyone why they endure such brutal conditions. But alongside those wins came the dark moments, the meltdowns, the disasters, the times when even a legend of the goldfields, a man who has built his name and reputation on unbreakable determination, almost lost it all. For Tony, success in mining has never been about luck or chance. Many people see his victories on television and think it is only about finding the right ground or striking a lucky patch of pay dirt. But the truth is very different. The heart of his story this season was not in his wins, but in his single biggest disaster, a moment of silence that cost him nearly everything. You see, in the Yukon, silence is not peace. Silence is deadly. Silence means the machines have stopped. And when the machines are not running, they are not making money. For Tony Beets, a man who has been mining for decades and calls himself the king of the Klondike, silence is the most expensive sound he can hear. Every minute a machine sits idle is another fortune slipping away. And this season, that silence came at a price of almost $100,000 a day. From the very beginning, the goal was bold. Tony set his sights on pulling in $3 million worth of gold. To achieve a number that high, everything had to work perfectly. There was no room for error. Every part of the operation had to flow like a perfectly tuned machine. Trucks, excavators, dozers, pumps, and conveyors all needed to move in harmony, like a great orchestra of steel and diesel. But at the very center of that orchestra was one single star: the wash plant. This season, Tony relied on one major wash plant to make his dream a reality. The plant was called Sluice, a massive beast of a machine that could chew through mountains of pay dirt and turn it into shining profit. It was the heart of the operation, the one thing that stood between success and disaster. But that reliance also meant one terrifying truth: if the sluice went down, the entire operation went down with it. Relying on just one machine, no matter how powerful, is like betting your entire fortune on a single roll of the dice. At first, it seemed like luck was on their side. The season began with a glimmer of hope. Tony's cousin Mike had been given the job of moving and firing up the sluice plant. It was no easy task. A wash plant is not just a simple machine. It is a towering network of conveyors, screens, sluice runs, and steel frames weighing more than 100,000 pounds. To move it requires tearing the entire structure down, loading it onto trucks, hauling it across dangerous terrain, and then reassembling it piece by piece with exact precision. Even one misaligned bolt can cause catastrophic failure. But Mike pulled it off. Against the odds, he got the massive machine up and running. The plant roared to life. Pay dirt ran across its screens, rocks tumbled, water rushed through the sluices. For a moment, everything looked perfect. For a moment, the road to $3 million seemed wide open. The crew felt the relief wash over them. The hard work of moving the wash plant had paid off, and now all that was left was to keep it running day and night, pulling gold from the ground. But the Yukon has a cruel way of reminding even the toughest miners who is really in charge. Just as the crew was finding their rhythm, it happened. A sound cut through the air, a sound colder than the northern wind and sharper than any warning bell. A grinding, shrieking protest of metal against metal. It was the sound of something very wrong inside the heart of the wash plant. The noise was enough to stop everyone in their tracks. Miners know that sound. It is the sound of destruction. And sure enough, the symphony of steel and water came to an abrupt stop. The wash plant fell silent. The silence was deafening. broken only by the panicked shouts of the crew as they rushed to shut everything down before more damage could spread. For a miner, this was a nightmare come to life. Every single day that the wash plant was down, the loss could be as much as $100,000. Every hour, every minute, the dream of $3 million slipped further away. The crew gathered around the silent machine with dread heavy in their hearts. This was not a small hiccup. This was not something that could be patched up in a few minutes. This was a full-blown disaster. And everyone knew what was coming. Tony Beets was on his way, and when he arrived, he would unleash a storm like no other. When the Viking himself arrived on the scene, the air grew thick with tension. For Tony, a machine breaking down is not just a problem, it's a personal insult. It means someone messed up, someone was not paying attention, and that is something Tony cannot tolerate. He immediately began his investigation, demanding answers, searching for the cause. It didn't take long to find the problem, and it was far worse than anyone wanted to admit. Deep inside the plant, the impact plate, a massive piece of steel designed to take the brutal pounding of thousands of rocks every day, had shattered. Where there should have been solid metal, there was now a gaping hole. Running the machine in this condition was impossible. It would destroy everything below it. The repair was going to be expensive, 5 figures at least, but the real cost was not in the steel, it was in the silence. Every day without that plant running was another $100,000 lost. The dream of $3 million was already starting to look like a nightmare. But what made it worse was the cause. As they dug deeper, the truth became clear. The plate had not failed on its own. The damage had been caused by oversized boulders crashing through the screens. Rocks far too big to be there had been fed into the plant. The crew had not been paying attention. They had been careless. For Tony, this was the ultimate sin. He didn't just see a broken machine. He saw neglect. He saw his crew dropping the ball. His anger erupted like a volcano. He bellowed across the claim, his voice echoing in every corner. If people had been paying attention to the rock, this wouldn't happen. His anger was more than frustration. It was a mix of betrayal and desperation. This was not just a machine failure. This was a self-inflicted wound. The cost of this mistake was staggering. The plate could be replaced, the steel could be repaired, but the time lost could never be recovered. Every moment of silence was another fortune slipping away. The Yukon is a place where time is measured in ounces of gold, not in hours on the clock. With the wash plant sitting silent, Tony Beets was not just losing time, he was bleeding gold. The crew knew that every tick of the clock meant another pile of money slipping away, and the pressure hung over them like a storm cloud ready to break. The meltdown had shaken them, and the silence of the massive machine echoed across the claim like a warning bell. But while Tony raged, his cousin Mike stepped into the moment. Mike was the one who had successfully moved and assembled the giant plant, and now he was faced with an even greater test. It was one thing to build it, it was another to fix it when disaster struck. The crew, worn down from Tony's fury and the crushing weight of failure, now looked to Mike for leadership. A good foreman in the Yukon is not just a boss. He is like a doctor performing emergency surgery on a patient that cannot afford to die. Machines out here are not just tools. They are the very lifeblood of the mine. And Mike understood this better than anyone. He quickly assessed the damage and realized the scale of the problem. The massive steel plate had split wide open, leaving a dangerous gap. The vibration and pounding of countless rocks had caused the entire plate to give way. Without it, the plant could not run. There was no chance of ordering a replacement. That would take weeks, maybe longer, and by then, the season would be over. Waiting was not an option. The only choice was to fix it right there in the dirt, using whatever tools and skill they had on hand. This was going to be a battle of fire, steel, and pure determination. The crew jumped into action. Sparks flew as they cut into the steel, grinding and welding under impossible pressure. The Yukon wind bit at their faces. The roar of the cutting torches filled the air, and every man on the crew knew that failure was not an option. A bad weld would mean more breaks, more damage, and even more lost gold. But under Mike's steady hand, they worked with a kind of desperate precision. The repair was like open-heart surgery on the most valuable machine in their world. The thing that nobody tells you about gold mining is that it is not just about finding the gold. It is about keeping the machines alive long enough to get it. Machines are pushed to their breaking point in the Yukon. They are forced to run day and night, chewing through frozen dirt and massive rocks in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. They do not get days off, and when they break, the entire operation comes to a standstill. What the crew pulled off in that moment was nothing short of incredible. A repair that should have taken a full day or more was finished in just 2 hours. 2 hours of sweat, sparks, and sheer determination. When the last weld cooled and the final bolts were tightened, the crew stepped back and held their breath. It was time to test the plant. With Tony watching, the machine was fired up. For a moment, there was only silence and groans. And then, with a thunderous roar, the sluice came back to life. The sound of the plant running again was like music to the crew's ears. The conveyors rattled, the rocks tumbled, and water once again rushed through the sluices. The symphony of gold mining had been restored. Even Tony, a man known for his stern and unflinching demeanor, could not hide a rare smile. He gave Mike credit for pulling off what seemed like a miracle, saying that it was not easy to find people who could manage equipment like that. It was a moment of pride and relief for the entire crew. But even as they celebrated the victory, the reality loomed large. They had lost precious time, and the $3 million goal felt further away than ever. The plant was running again, but the question remained: could they still hit their target before the season ended? The answer would come in the cleanup. Mining is not about words or promises. It's about gold in the box. After the catastrophic breakdown and the miraculous repair, the first cleanup would tell the truth. If the ground was rich enough and the plant performed as it should, there was still a chance. If not, the entire season could collapse into disappointment. The crew gathered around the sluice boxes with nervous anticipation. Carefully, they began clearing the mats, washing the heavy black sand to reveal what lay beneath. This is the moment every miner lives for. It is the most nerve-wracking and exciting part of the job. Hours, days, and weeks of grueling labor all come down to this one single moment when the gold is finally revealed. As the scales tipped, the numbers climbed higher and higher. The final weight was staggering: 146 ounces of pure Yukon gold. At market prices, that single cleanup was worth over $365,000. The reaction was electric. For Tony, who had seen more gold than most men will ever dream of, it was still enough to draw a grin. "Not too bad," he said, in his usual understated way. For the crew, it was proof that their blood, sweat, and near disaster had not been in vain. They had turned the silence of failure into the roar of success. The cleanup pushed their season total to 1,250 ounces. When the numbers were tallied, the final value of their gold came to a jaw-dropping $3.1 million. They had not just met their goal, they had surpassed it. Against the odds, against the breakdowns and the meltdowns, Tony Beets and his crew had conquered the Yukon once again. But was the story really that simple? On the surface, it looked like the perfect ending to a Hollywood movie. The tough boss pushes his crew to the breaking point. They suffer a devastating failure. They pull off a miracle repair. And in the end, they walk away with millions of dollars in gold. It was a story of grit, determination, and triumph.
But anyone who has lived in the world of gold mining knows that life in the Klondike is not that neat. Success does not come wrapped in perfect story arcs. Real mining is messy. It's filled with small wins and small failures, long days of frustration, and short bursts of joy. So when the cameras showed the massive breakdown, the fiery meltdown, the miracle repair, and the perfectly timed cleanup, some could not help but wonder, was the whole story being told? The truth is that reality TV is about more than reality. It's about entertainment. For a show to survive, it has to keep viewers hooked. And to keep viewers hooked, the drama has to be big, the stakes has to be high, and the victories have to come at just the right time. That is why every disaster seems massive, every meltdown seems volcanic, and every success seems perfectly timed to create the ultimate payoff for viewers. None of this is to say that the gold isn't real or that the work isn't brutally hard. The miners earn every ounce they pull from the frozen ground. But the story we see on screen is crafted. For every massive breakdown that makes it on television, there are dozens of smaller routine fixes that never do. For every fiery meltdown, there are hours of steady, determined work that is simply not dramatic enough to show. Perhaps Tony's true genius is not just in his ability to mine gold, but also in his ability to thrive in this made-for-TV world. He is not just a master miner, he is also a master showman. He knows how to play his role, how to command the camera, and how to turn his operation into both a gold mine and a story that millions want to watch. At the end of the season, the numbers tell one truth: $3.1 million in gold. But the story behind those numbers is layered with tension, drama, and questions. Was it as neat as it appeared? Or was it shaped to fit the perfect story arc that television demands? One thing is certain, in the Yukon, nothing is ever that simple.
Nothing comes easy. The silence of a machine, the roar of a meltdown, the miracle of a repair, and the shine of gold in the box, all of it is part of the journey. For Tony Beets and his crew, the road to $3 million was not just about gold. It was about survival. And this season, they survived. The season was over, the gold weighed, and the numbers written down. On paper, it was a success. Over $3 million in gold. But behind the numbers, there was a story of fire, frustration, and human struggle. To truly understand Tony Beets and his road to $3 million, you have to look beyond the ounces and the dollars. You have to look at the man himself, his meltdowns, his relentless drive, and the way he pushes both machines and people to their absolute limits. Tony Beets is not like most men. In the Yukon, he has built a reputation as the Viking King, a man who never backs down from a challenge, no matter how brutal. He has lived through the cold, the failures, and the endless problems that come with gold mining. But what sets him apart is not just his toughness. It is his refusal to accept defeat. When others would walk away, Tony digs in deeper. When others say it can't be done, Tony makes sure it gets done. That stubbornness is both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. This season showed that side of him more clearly than ever. When the wash plant broke down, Tony's fury exploded. His meltdown was not just anger, it was fear, masked by rage. In the Yukon, silence is deadly. Every moment the machine sits still, money drains away like water through a broken pipe. For Tony, whose entire life has been built on keeping machines running and gold flowing, the sound of silence is like a knife in the gut. That is why he roared at his crew.
That is why he shouted about rocks too big for the screens, about negligence, about the crushing cost of carelessness. It was not just about the broken steel. It was about the fact that one mistake could destroy the dream of 3 million. When Tony yells, it is not just noise. It is the sound of pressure boiling over. It is the weight of a season pressing down on one man's shoulders. But what makes the story more powerful is what came after. In the middle of the meltdown, Mike stepped forward. Where Tony brought fire, Mike brought focus. He showed that leadership is not only about shouting orders, but about keeping calm when everything is falling apart. The two men are opposites in some ways. Tony is raw, blunt, and fiery, while Mike is steady, precise, and patient. But together, they form a balance that keeps the operation alive. The crew, caught between the two styles, learned what gold mining really means. It is not glamorous. It is not easy. It is not about holding a giant nugget in your hand and smiling for the cameras. It is about sleepless nights, endless repairs, and the crushing fear that the ground might run dry before the season is done. It is about welding steel in the freezing air, working until your muscles ache, and still showing up the next day because quitting is not an option. The repair of the wash plant showed the world what the Yukon demands. The plant was not just a machine. It was the heart of the operation. Without it, everything stopped. The repair was more than steel and sparks. It was survival. And when it roared back to life, it was a reminder that in the Klondike, the line between success and disaster is razor thin. But beyond the machines and meltdowns, there is another truth about mining in the Yukon. It is not just about fighting the ground. It is about fighting yourself. Gold miners live in isolation, far from comfort, surrounded by mud, ice, and endless noise. The days are long, the nights are short, and the pressure never stops. That pressure does things to people. It tests patience. It tests loyalty. It tests the very limits of what a man can endure. Tony Beets thrives in that environment because he was built for it. He is not afraid of conflict. He does not shy away from shouting when something goes wrong. He believes that in the Yukon there is no room for softness. If a job needs to be done, you do it. No excuses. If a mistake costs money, you face the fire. That is why his meltdowns are legendary. They are not just moments of temper. They are explosions of a man who refuses to accept anything less than total commitment. But even with all the shouting, Tony knows the value of his crew. He may call them out. He may push them to the edge, but he also relies on them. He knows that without men like Mike, without welders, mechanics, and drivers, the gold would never leave the ground. Their crew understands this too. Behind the shouting, there is respect. Behind the fire, there is trust. That is why they stay. That is why they fight through the breakdowns and the meltdowns. Because at the end of the day, they know that Tony Beets leads them not just with words, but with results. This season proved that again. The repair saved the operation. The cleanup proved the ground still held gold. The numbers at the end showed that they had beaten the odds. But the story was not just about hitting a target. It was about showing what it takes to survive in a world where failure is always one broken machine away. Yet, as much as this story inspires, there is another side to it. The side shaped by cameras, by producers, and by the demands of television. The question that hangs over every scene is simple. How much of what we see is raw truth, and how much is crafted drama? The meltdowns are real. Tony's anger is no act. The gold is real. Those ounces are pulled from the ground with sweat and steel. But the way the story is told is shaped for the audience. For every massive crisis we see, there are dozens of smaller repairs that never make it on screen. For every tense moment captured by the cameras, there are hours of quiet work and problem solving that don't make it. The show needs drama. It needs highs and lows, victories and defeats. And so the narrative is built. The plant breaks down at the worst possible time. Tony explodes with fury. His crew scrambles. Against the odds, they pull off a miracle repair. And just when hope seems lost, they strike it rich. It's the perfect story arc, and it keeps millions watching. But in the real Yukon, life is rarely so perfectly timed. That doesn't mean the miners are actors. Far from it. The sweat is real, the danger is real, and the money at stake is very real. But the story we see is a version of reality shaped to hold our attention. The tension is heightened, the meltdowns magnified, and the victories polished to shine even brighter. And perhaps